Those who tamper with lineage seldom realize they are cutting their own thread first. Anonymous marginalia. 1859. 3 bodies were exhumed from the red clay behind Barrow House in the spring of 1852. Their graves were shallow, the coffins mismatched. No parish record marked their deaths, and no physician in Hancock County could recall signing certificates. The coroner's notes describe preserved tissue of unnatural hue, and a faint odor of ether still clinging to the garments. No cause was assigned, no inquiry pursued. The landowner, Dr. Silas Barrow, was found dead in his study a week later, pistol in hand, mirror cracked beside him. The newspapers called it melancholia brought on by financial decline. The neighbors called it justice, long delayed. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. Barrow House still stands, or what remains of it, 3 miles east of the Oconee River bend, its veranda sunk, the shutters nailed tight against the wind. The locals avoid it, claiming the soil itself refuses to keep crops. Yet within the state archives in Milledgeville, a set of letters survives. The Barrow Correspondence, 1846-1852, donated anonymously in 1911. The handwriting is precise, medical, and detached, together with the coroner's docket and a fragmentary journal labeled private. For the record, they outline a dissent more deliberate than madness. Dr. Silas Barrow was not a cruel man by reputation. He'd studied medicine in Edinburgh, returned home with new theories on hereditary disease and the transmission of constitution. George's plantations, he wrote, offered a living laboratory of bloodlines. His intent, at least in the early letters, was scholarly, to chart how temperament, endurance, and affliction pass through generations. He called it physiognomic inheritance. By 1848, he had converted the east wing of his house into what he termed a domestic infirmary. He employed 3 attendants, freedmen on paper, but wholly dependent on his patronage, to keep records, prepare tonics, and assist in anatomical demonstrations. Each case file was numbered rather than named. In later margins, he wrote, "The subject must be anonymous to remain objective." Among those files was a note marked Specimen 12, concerning a local boy afflicted with congenital tremors. Barrow administered tinctures of belladonna and recorded pulse intervals with meticulous regularity. The final entry reads simply, "Stopped." Barrow's obsession with hereditary strength soon took a moral turn. In his private journal, he lamented that modern society weakens itself through compassion, arguing that mercy toward the sick preserved frailty. He quoted Galton decades before Galton was born to his theory, writing, "Let us not romanticize defect, let us correct it." In 1850 a yellow fever wave passed through Hancock County. Barrow treated dozens and lost half. Yet he noticed, as he wrote to a colleague in Augusta, that certain families seem immune, perhaps owing to admixture, perhaps providence. He began charting genealogies, marking in red those who survived the fever. His notes verge on theology. If the Lord writes endurance into certain lines, perhaps the physician's task is to decipher his script. That year he took in his widowed cousin, Eliza Mercer, and her 2 children. They lived quietly at the house, rarely seen in town. Parish ledgers list them as communicants until 1851, when their attendance abruptly ceased. No explanation was recorded. By winter, servants reported that Dr. Barrow had forbidden lamps after sunset, claiming the flicker agitated his experiments. From the road, travelers saw only the dull glow of the study window, burning past midnight. When the sheriff's report later summarized the property, it listed anatomical instruments of foreign manufacture, numerous glass vessels containing unidentifiable solutions, and several journals bound in oilcloth. The journals, 3 volumes, form the heart of what remains. They begin as case logs and end as confession. January 3, 1852 v. Observation of inheritance continues. Results encouraging. Subject A shows marked improvement in constitution. Subject B retains weakness of sight, perhaps recessive. Adjusted regimen accordingly. February 11. The experiment has drawn scrutiny from ignorant parties. The church objects to interference with what they deem providence. They mistake devotion for hubris. For March 1, one specimen expired. 'Cause indeterminate, must not allow sentiment to interfere with study. After that, the entries become erratic, sentences blotted, words carved into the paper, as if by trembling hand. The last page breaks mid-phrase, the legacy must. And then nothing. The Barrow correspondence ends there. But scattered county records fill small gaps. A purchase ledger from Macon lists 6 iron cradles, surgical adjustable, ordered in 1851 by a Dr. S. Barrow. A second invoice, never paid. Details, embalming spirits, imported. Witnesses recall wagons arriving at night, covered with tarpaulins. No burials were recorded on the family plot. When the house was searched after Silas Barrow's death, the East Wing infirmary contained 3 tables, all stained dark despite scrubbing. One had shackles fixed to its legs, though the sheriff's report euphemized them as restraints for violent patients. In a locked cupboard lay glass jars, labeled L1, 2, L3, each holding what appeared to be preserved organs. The coroner who opened them fainted. To the modern reader, these details sound like the vocabulary of sensational rumor. Yet the handwriting, the seals, the receipts, they're verifiable. Every mark of bureaucratic fact clings to this story, like mildew to paper. And that is what makes it terrifying, not the supernatural, but the ordinary machinery of respectability surrounding atrocity. In the margin of one recovered page, a different hand, likely Eliza Mercer's, has written, "He said he was curing us of weakness. I think he meant to cure himself." What that means will unfold in later parts. For now, remember this. When the sheriff entered Barrow House after the gunshot, he found the mirror shattered and Dr. Barrow slumped at his desk. Beside him lay an open anatomy text and a note that read only, "Blood proves truth." No one ever determined whose blood covered the floor. The first letters from Eliza Mercer appear 6 months before the tragedy. They were addressed to her brother in Charleston but never posted. Found instead, folded inside a hymnal recovered from the Barrow Library. The handwriting begins neat, domestic, polite. By the final letter, it staggers like someone writing in the dark. August 3, 1851, Silas is consumed by his notes. He has drawn a family tree that reaches back before our grandfather, with strange lines, linking those who share no kinship that I know. He says there are traits that leap like flame from ember to ember. The children tire of his measurements. Every fortnight he makes them breathe into his glass contraptions and pricks their fingers for samples. He swears he can see strength in a droplet. I wish him peace, yet I fear he seeks something not meant to be found. The next letter, dated only, harvest season, ends mid-sentence. Ink pools where the pen halted. Visitors to Barrow House grew fewer as that summer wore on. The only consistent caller was Mr. John Fallow, a neighboring landowner who dabbled in natural philosophy. His notebooks, found later in a trunk, confirm he and Silas corresponded about familial endurance and the preservation of lineages. One entry stands out. Dr. B. proposes that moral quality is not taught but bred, that conscience itself follows the blood. He calls it the symmetry of virtue. When I asked whether this made the wicked irredeemable, he smiled and said, "Precisely." I left unsettled. A Fallow ceased his visits after witnessing what he termed a demonstration in temperament. His account, though fragmentary, describes one of Barrow's attendants exhibiting violent spasms after a series of injections. The doctor, rather than intervening, recorded pulse counts aloud, as if reading from scripture. The attendant, name lost to history, died 2 days later. His burial site has never been found. In the surviving medical notebook, Vol. E., Barrow refers repeatedly to the principle. Its exact definition shifts with each entry. At first, it is a theory of selection, later, a law of salvation. The handwriting itself grows less tidy, the margins crowded with geometric diagrams resembling genealogical webs. Lines interlace across pages like veins. Excerpt oct. 4th 1851, the principle manifests when purity converges upon design. If nature errs, the physician must guide her hand. We speak of God's image, yet who restores it when blurred? Scholars have debated whether Barrow's descent was philosophical or physiological. One letter from a colleague in Augusta hints at possible mercury exposure. Your account of tremors and sleeplessness concerns me. Cease the vapors. They corrode the humors and the mind alike. But by then, reason had already begun to fracture under revelation. The servant's testimony, preserved from later depositions, adds mundane horror to the myth. Sarah, the housemaid, recalled that the doctor kept the rooms so cold the fire would die before dawn, and forbade the windows to be opened. He said warmth spoiled the samples. She spoke of glass jars filled with what looked like pale clay suspended in cloudy fluid. He called them his stillborn theories, she said, but they moved when the light hit M. The sheriff dismissed her statement as hysteria, yet her description matches a note found in Barrow's own hand. Specimen 19 exhibited twitching when exposed to heat. Must determine if reaction is chemical or divine. By late autumn, the household routine had become liturgical. Bells rang at dawn and dusk. No one was permitted speech during the hours of reflection. Meals were taken in silence while Dr. Barrow recorded pulse intervals with a metronome. When Eliza objected, he reprimanded her gently but firmly, saying, "This is not cruelty, it is observation. The spirit reveals itself best under stillness." It was during these weeks that neighbors began reporting faint chanting from the property at night. One passing deacon claimed to see lanterns moving through the pecan grove, like a procession of saints. Another man swore he heard weeping from beneath the house, as if someone were buried alive and praying. When questioned, Silas dismissed the accounts as country superstition, yet his notes for November contain a single, haunting line: "All awaken when the bell tolls," a document dated December 12, 1851, a private letter to an untraced recipient in Philadelphia, marks the point where scientific curiosity turned doctrinal. "You once wrote that mankind's redemption lies not in faith but correction. I concur. We must refine the species, one virtue at a time. The weak birth the weak, the diseased transmit their ruin. If we cannot prevent conception, we can at least edit its outcome. I have proofs now, living proofs. Georgia may sneer, but the century will follow me." The living proofs were almost certainly the Mercer children. Parish census records show their names: Samuel's age 12 and Clara's age 9, until 1851. Thereafter, the space beside their mother's entry is blank. From here, the trail divides between record and rumor. Some claimed Eliza fled into the marshlands and perished. Others said she died in childbirth, though no infant was registered. In an unsigned deposition, written decades later, by a man who claimed to have been Barrow's groundskeeper, there appears a chilling passage. "The mistress's room was sealed after Christmas. Doctor said she'd gone north for her health, but I seen the carriage never leave the gate. He burned sheets for 3 nights running. When the smoke cleared, he told me the house was clean again. I quit next morning." If this account holds even a grain of truth, Eliza Mercer was gone by the new year. The final known correspondence before Barrow's death is a telegram fragment from early 1852, addressed simply to J.F., presumed to be John Fallow. The line, preserved only by a clerk's copybook, reads, "It breathes. Come witness." There is no record of Fallow's reply, nor did he ever speak publicly of Barrow again. His journals after that month a blank save for one sentence written years later: "He mistook resurrection for inheritance." Today, when researchers examine the Barrow archives, they linger on the shift in tone between early optimism and later mania. The neat physician's Latin gives way to short, fevered phrases: "blood confesses," "heirs of marrow," a principle fulfilled. By all measurable evidence, the man believed he had discovered not merely a biological law, but a theological one. that blood could be perfected through human hand. The state would later sanitize the record, filing his experiments under domestic medical irregularities. Yet the surviving materials, especially the small jar labeled Subject A, retained sample, suggest something more deliberate than madness. Contemporary analysis of the residue found traces of bone dust and congealed protein inconsistent with any known preservative of the time. In the margin of that label, written in a faint, almost childlike scrawl, are 3 words: "It looks back." That phrase would reappear a century later, when surveyors reopened the Barrow property during the WPA mapping of 1937. They found the cellar collapsed, and a faint odor, like ether and rust, emanating from beneath. The work crew refused to dig further after unearthing fragments of glass etched with initials. The foreman's report closes abruptly. Site unsafe. Recommend reburial. No one has attempted excavation since. Extracts from Dr. Barrow's private journal, Vol. Re's January 1853's March 1854. I was warned not to open the chest from the Vexley estate, but professional curiosity outpaced caution. Inside were 9 sealed folios, each marked with a Roman numeral and bound in calfskin. The handwriting was unmistakably that of Reverend Alaric Vexley himself, identical to the letters preserved in the diocesan archive. The ink had rusted to a brownish red. The edges smelled faintly of carbolic and ash. The first folio began with a prayer. "O Lord, grant that the seed of my blood may never decay, even as the world about us festers." He recorded his wife's confinement in language that blurred medicine and liturgy. Measurements of pulse and temperature, annotated beside verses from Leviticus. He described the examination of lineage, as though breeding were a sacrament, the continuation of an unbroken covenant between flesh and heaven. By the 3rd folio, the writing changed. The pen dug deeper into the paper, phrases repeated with obsessive symmetry. I suspected the Reverend had begun dosing himself with laudanum. He spoke of visions in which his ancestors appeared, bearing torches through underground halls, urging him to complete the pattern before winter. And among the folios was also a sheaf of anatomical sketches, crude, almost childlike, showing torsos divided by cross, hatching. Each was labeled prototype. The heads were faceless. I sent a copy to Dr. Hanford at the Medical College for verification. His reply, dated 4 February 1853, was terse: "Not surgical diagrams. These appear ritual in origin. Do not pursue further." The following month, a letter arrived from Eleanor Vexley, the last surviving child. She was writing from Charleston, where she had sought refuge with an aunt. The paper was water-stained, the script unsteady. "Sir, you spoke kindly at the inquest and I am grateful, but you must not imagine the worst has ended. My father's followers meet still, pretending to study scripture. They believe themselves keepers of the covenant. One of them carries a ledger that is never shown. I beg you, find it before they use it again." I could not ignore her plea. In late March 1853, I returned to the ruins of the Vexley parsonage. The house stood hollow, its timbers warped by floodwater. Beneath the study floor, I found a trapdoor leading to a chamber hardly 4 feet high. Within lay rows of glass jars, their contents preserved in cloudy spirits. Not organs exactly, something intermediary, like malformed embryos or grafts. Each jar was labeled with initials EVMV, LV, the names of Alaric's 3 daughters. The sight turned my stomach, but curiosity compelled me to inspect further. Beneath the shelf I found the ledger Eleanor had described, a book bound in human skin. Thin, freckled, unmistakably so. On its spine was embossed a single word: Z, continuance. The ledger's entries spanned 2 decades. It documented pairings, births, deaths and, disturbingly, measurements of bone length, ocular hue, and temperament. Every margin contained marginalia in Alaric's hand, moral justifications masquerading as theology. He wrote that, whom perfection entered through foreign mingling, and that purity must be reclaimed by repetition. He was no mere cleric. He had become a eugenic philosopher before the term existed. I brought the ledger back to Millhaven under lock and key. For weeks, I could not sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I heard a faint dripping, like the liquid from those jars, falling onto stone. In April 1853, Eleanor Vexley vanished from Charleston. The aunt with whom she lodged reported she left before dawn, taking only a Bible and a sealed envelope addressed to me. The courier delivered it 2 days later. Inside was a single page torn from her father's ledger, on which she had scrawled, "He is calling us home." I returned again to the ruins on the night of 12th of May. The river mist hung thick. Frogs made a racket that seemed to echo from underground. I carried a lantern and a pistol, both unnecessary, as it turned out. The house was still empty, but the earth around it had been disturbed, a fresh mound behind the root cellar. I began to dig. 2 feet down I struck wood, a small coffin, the size of a child's. The hinges were new. Inside lay not a body, but a mask of wax molded to resemble Reverend Vexley's face. Embedded in its mouth was a folded parchment. Blood never disperses. It only hides in the soil until the proper rain. That night I resolved to burn the ledger. Yet as I prepared the hearth, the pages seemed to resist, curling inward as if avoiding the flame. I thought of Eleanor's letter and hesitated. What if its destruction would release something worse? So instead I sealed it in an iron box and buried it beneath the apothecary floor. By summer I began to notice peculiarities in my own household. My wife complained of whispers at the window after midnight. Servants refused to descend to the cellar, and one morning, the ledger reappeared on my desk. Its clasp unbroken, the cover dry though the ground above it was sodden from storm. The entries had changed. The latest page was dated in my own hand, though I had written nothing. It described, with precision, my daily routine, my habits, and, chillingly, a notation beside my name. Subject demonstrates moral compliance. Proceed to stage Sibiru. I sought advice from the magistrate, but he dismissed me gently, assuming fatigue. Dr. Hanford declined further correspondence. Left alone, I turned to study. If Vexley's covenant was meant to transcend mortality, perhaps it required belief as contagion, passed not through body but through idea. That theory gained weight when a packet of parish registers arrived unsolicited from the diocesan office. Among them was a baptism record for a child born April 1853 in Millhaven Barrow, Elias Alaric, my own son. But my wife had never been with child. The entry was pure invention, unless I confronted her. She wept and swore she had dreamed of a man reciting prayers in a voice that was not mine, pressing her hand to a page that burned like brandy. Since then, she said, she felt a stirring as if something lives where nothing should. Her belly was flat, yet beneath her skin I saw movement. Perhaps a tremor of fear, perhaps something else. By winter the house stood silent, but for the clock's uneven tick. I had boarded the cellar and dismissed the staff. Each night I read the ledger again, searching for a clause of deliverance. Instead I found an addendum written in newer ink. To the caretaker who reads this bear witness. When the line completes its 10th generation, the covenant shall wake. The handwriting was my own. I cannot yet explain how ink appears without a pen, nor how words enter a mind unbidden. But I feel the same pressure that must have seized Reverend Vexley in his final months. A certainty that lineage itself is an organism, and that it uses us merely as temporary hosts. I end this entry with a confession. I no longer trust the integrity of my thoughts. If these pages are found after my death, I beg the reader to destroy them without examination. Fire, not reason, is the only cure for contagion of the soul. The lantern gutters as I write. Outside, the frogs have fallen silent. From beneath the floorboards comes a slow, deliberate sound, like something testing the grain from below. It knocks once, twice, then a third time, and in that hollow rhythm, I hear the syllables of my own name, selections from the Millhaven provincial records and the personal correspondence of Inspector Ruthin, 1854-1856. Administrative Memorandum, July 1854, to the Office of the Governor, Savannah, Regarding the recent deaths at the Barrow residence, I submit the following for record. Dr. Jonathan Barrow, aged 41, physician of Millhaven, was found deceased in his study on the morning of 3 July 1854. Cause of death: self-inflicted incision to the throat using a surgical scalpel. The wound was clean, deliberate, and fatal. His wife, Sarah Barrow, was discovered in the adjoining chamber, unconscious but alive, showing signs of severe shock and malnutrition. The room contained an overturned oil lamp, several scattered folios, and an iron box buried halfway into the floorboards. The contents of this box were transferred under seal to the State Medical Board by order of Inspector Ruthven. Local rumor describes unnatural phenomena surrounding the incident, but these have been omitted from the official report. Witnesses disagree, and no physical evidence of voices, light beneath the floor, or moving walls has been substantiated. Signed, Inspector Edwin Ruthven, Provincial Constabulary Thew. Ruthven's private notes undated, discovered posthumously among estate papers 1857. I was the first to open the iron box. Inside lay the ledger Dr. Barrow referenced in his correspondence with the diocesan registry, the so-called continuance. Its cover bore traces of salt and a faint odor of burned tallow. Though the clasp had no visible lock, the pages turned only when touched with gloved hands, as if skin alone might rouse it. The first entries matched those copied by Barrow: genealogies, numerical data, theological commentary. But the later pages differed. The handwriting, though resembling his, was steadier than a dead man's hand should be. The final entry was dated one day after his death. Subject released, successor appointed, ministry to continue through chosen vessels. I should have closed the book then. Instead, I read on. The entry following was in my own script. Testimony of Sarah Barrow, recorded August 1854. He was not himself those last weeks. He spoke softly to the floor, to the air. I thought grief had driven him to prayer, but the words were not of God. He said the covenant would pass to whomever touched the book. I begged him to burn it. Yet he smiled and said fire is only a form of breath, and breath carries the name onward. When he took the knife, he thanked me for being the vessel. Then the room filled with a smell like iron and rain. He whispered that his father had been waiting beneath the earth since the flood. Signed under oath, Sarah Barrow IV. Extract from Ruthven's journal, September 1854. 3 weeks since the inquest closed, and still the dreams persist. I see a house not my own, its windows boarded, its cellar ajar. Children's voices recite numbers in a language older than English. Always the same sequence: 10, 10, 1, begin again. At dawn I wake with my palms marked as if pressed against a hot grate. No wound, only discoloration, dark rings like the pattern of old coins. My physician calls it a contact reaction. He cannot explain from what. That morning, the ledger lay open upon my desk, though I had locked it in the archives the night before. Confidential letters, January 1855, from Inspector Ruthven to Bishop Lyle. Diocese of Augusta, Your Excellency. I write not as officer but as penitent. The document retrieved from Dr. Barrow's home is no mere diary. Its entries alter according to the reader's sin or doubt. It names each who touches it. I have seen my own lineage traced forward into generations that cannot yet exist. Last night, I dreamt of a child bearing my name, but another's eyes. He stood beside the Vexley parsonage, though the building burned a decade ago. I implore the church to intervene. There are practices recorded within that border upon sacrament inverted. Marriage rites without partners. Baptisms in blood not water. If any fragment of holiness remains within our order, we must consecrate the soil where this began. Do not delay. Already my dreams repeat Barrow's final prayer. What is bound in ink shall rise in flesh. Yours in dread faith, E. Ruthven via Ecclesiastical Response, February 1855 to Inspector Ruthven. Your letter has been received. His Excellency thanks you for your vigilance but advises silence. The Vexley affair remains a sensitive matter. The diocese has dispatched a small commission, informally termed the Ministry of Silence, to recover and suppress all materials related to that lineage. You are instructed to relinquish custody of the ledger immediately and to speak of it to no one. A stipend will be issued for your cooperation. Remember, obedience is the first cure of contagion. Secretary to Bishop Lyle V. Re. Ruthven's Marginalias, written in pencil between official pages. They came for the ledger on the evening of March 3rd. 4 men in plain coats, bearing ecclesiastical seals. One carried a reliquary filled with ash. When they entered my office, the air cooled as if winter had stepped inside. The eldest, a pale man named Father Croix, asked if I had read beyond the first folio. I confessed I had. He sighed, removed his gloves, and pressed 2 fingers to my temple. I felt something sharp, a pulse of warmth. Then nothing. They took the ledger, leaving only the scent of burnt parchment. I awoke hours later with dried blood at my ear and a single scrap of paper on my desk. On it, in faint red ink, "Memory is mercy. You shall forget." But I have not forgotten. In fact, I remember too clearly. V. Subsequent report, June 1856, Millhaven Courier. Local notices, UNUSULIL NSASURVNCOR TAR. Several families report symptoms resembling sleepwalking, shared dreams, and the utterance of unfamiliar prayers during the night. Physicians attribute the affliction to nervous imitation, a contagion of imagination. Authorities assure the public there is no cause for alarm. Ox. Private letter from Sarah Barrow to her sisters, July 1856. Dearest Margaret, I hear whispers that the inspector who investigated Jonathan's death has gone missing. They say he left his post without notice, that his home was found empty save for a cradle rocking itself by the fire. I know the sound, that rhythm. It is the same that once came from beneath our floor. If you love your children, leave Millhaven. The air here remembers too much. Yours in haste, Sarah X. Undated fragment, discovered in diocesan archive. Box marked. Suppressed material. It is not death they serve, nor life, but the seam between them, the hinge of lineage that refuses to close. Every covenant demands renewal. Theirs was written in heredity, and the ink was never meant to dry. Some nights, I dream the ministry still walks among us, collecting silence like tithers. They carry books that cannot be burned, prayers that cannot be unsaid, and somewhere, beneath the parsonage ruins, a heartbeat echoes 10 times, then once and begins again. Selections from the surviving correspondences of Father Croix, The Ministry of Silence, 1856-1859, with supplementary field notes recovered from the Provincial Medical Registry. Memorandum from the Ministry of Silence, C. March 1856, to the Office of Ecclesiastical Affairs, Diocese of Augusta. Subject: Progress Report on Containment and Renewal, following the Millhaven disturbances and the Barrow case. The ministry has undertaken a complete audit of hereditary irregularities in the surrounding counties. 42 households exhibit patterns consistent with the so-called continuance doctrine, genealogical inscriptions, repetitive naming customs, anomalous records of stillbirth and revival. Our agents are instructed to confiscate all printed or handwritten materials bearing the sign of the tenfold circle. Where compliance fails, erasure by flame is authorized. The doctrine is not of written theology but of lived recurrence. It thrives in memory. Therefore, the first act of mercy remains forgetting. Signed, Father Elias Croix, Minister, in charge, Harriet. Private Field Journal of Father Croix, April 1856. The Barrow house is silent now. The shutters nailed, the soil salted. Yet every night as I pass its gate, I hear a faint ticking beneath the ground, like the pulse of a buried watch. I know it for what it is. The old covenant's residue. The inspector, Ruthven, was right. The ledger is an organism disguised as a record. It feeds on recollection. Destroying it by fire only frees its contents into air, where they seek another mind to root in. For the sake of order, I have sealed the remains in a reliquary lined with quicklime and glass. It shall not breathe through stone. Still, my dreams alter. Last night I spoke aloud a sentence I did not know. What is bound in ink shall rise in flesh. I woke with the taste of salt on my tongue, and my hands wet with dew that smelled faintly of blood. Ethic. Letter from Sarah Barrow to Reverend Samuels, May 1856. Reverend, you wrote that my husband's sins were his alone, yet I see them walking in the faces of our neighbors. Infants are born with marks around their wrists, as if bound before breathing. The cows calve twins whose hearts beat opposite rhythms. At night, the well water glows faintly, and the mirror shows a second reflection a blink too late. I have sealed the house as you commanded. But the ground moves. Sometimes I hear Jonathan's voice from beneath the roots of the magnolia tree, counting as he used to in the laboratory. 10, 10, 1, begin again. If faith is a wall, Reverend, then tell me what prayer can mortar the cracks. Your servant in dread, Sarah Barrow A.V., Ministry of Silence, Internal Directive, July 1857. Topic: Implementation of the Renewal Doctrine. Summary. Field agents report that mere suppression of texts and testimony has proven insufficient. Contagion persists through oral lineage. The ministry therefore authorizes controlled assimilation. Sanctify the doctrine under new liturgical language to dilute its potency. The phrases continuance and inheritance are to be replaced with renewal and grace of lineage. Parish records shall reflect this change by the coming Advent. Those who resist are to be declared preservants of contagion. Remember, we do not destroy the doctrine, we convert it. V. Diary of Inspector Ruthven. Fragment. August 1857. They told me I resigned 2 years ago. I recall no such act. My name appears on documents I do not remember signing. The ministry insists I rest, that the headaches and voices are consequence of exposure. But I know better. They have read the ledger again. Or perhaps it has read them. I see Father Croix's men wandering the lanes at night, their lanterns covered with red cloth, so the light does not attract attention. Yet when that glow passes under my window, every photograph in the house tilts slightly on its nail, as if listening. In sleep I dream of the Barrow child who never was, the one they said died stillborn. He walks now as a youth of 12, his eyes milk pale, repeating the same plea, write it again. But when I wake, words I never wrote appear in my journal, patient lists, lineages, medical symbols drawn in trembling hand. The doctrine is using me to reproduce itself. VI, Ministry Archive. The Croix Report, January 1858, concerning the Barrow case and the spread of the continuance faith. The contagion of recurrence cannot be purged by denial alone. Every suppression creates vacancy, and vacancy invites return. Therefore, we establish the doctrine of renewal, a controlled liturgy, to contain memory within ritual. Parishioners shall repeat select phrases under supervision during confession. Through repetition, the meaning will erode, leaving only habit. We shall starve the idea by feeding it. V. Letter from Bishop Lyle to Father Croix, March 1858. Elias, I have read your report with mixed gratitude and unease. You propose to turn poison into sacrament. Be wary that the cup does not choose its own drinker. Remember, the ledger wrote back. Paper is patient. It waits for flesh to remember. I fear you already speak its language. Nevertheless, the ministry shall proceed. Providence, or what passes for it, demands closure. In obedience and fatigue, Filial V.E. Croix's personal confession, undelivered draft, June 1858. I have become the caretaker of what I swore to bury. Each night I conduct the renewal ritual alone. I recite the altered phrases, though I feel the old words pressing beneath them like roots under shallow soil. Once, while reading from the revised prayer, I saw the ink on the page thicken, rising as if alive. The letters bulged outward, forming the outline of a mouth. From it came a whisper, not mine. Continue. The reliquary in which I sealed the ledger has begun to weep moisture through the stone. It smells of brine and birth. If any future reader finds this, burn both page and hand. EX. Millhaven Gazette Notice, December 1858. Unseasonable disturbances reported parishioners at Sainbull. Elora's report faint chanting emanating from beneath the nave during evening mass. Clergy attribute the phenomenon to echoes in the heating ducts. No further comment. X. Addendum The Renewal Hymnals 1859 printing, unauthorized, A small pamphlet was distributed anonymously across the southern counties. The frontispiece bore the crest of the Ministry of Silence, though the diocese denies authorship. The text within was set in alternating Latin and English verses. O blood that binds, be water now. O word that breeds, be dust somehow. What once was sealed shall open wide, and through the breath, the name abide. Scholars note that when read backward, the verses restore the original phrasing of the continuance creed. Possession of the hymnal was declared heresy, yet fragments of its melody survive in children's rhymes even today. Dr. Halden reports a resurgence of congenital anomalies among families once connected to the Barrow lineage. Despite multiple relocations, all patients display the same physical mark, a faint circular scar at the nape of the neck resembling an ink blot. Publicly, it is described as a birthmark. Privately, the physicians call it the seal of continuation. Second, fragment from Ruthven's final entries, autumn 1859. I hear them beneath the parish floor again, voices in perfect rhythm, counting 10, 10, 1. The ministry believes it has mastered renewal. But I know what we've done. We have taught the disease to pray. The remainder of the file is missing. A note attached in 1890 reads simply, the doctrine remains effective. Continue the ritual. It is my professional opinion, wrote Dr. Alaric Vane, that the affliction found among the Barrow descendants cannot be described by any known pathology. The patients present with intermittent catatonia, unprovoked bleeding from the eyes and mouth, and a peculiar translucence of the skin. The flesh, when pressed, leaves no indentation, only a cold elasticity. The blood, drawn and left to stand, separates not into serum and clot, but into a faint ash-colored sediment, as though something in it has burned away. This was the first official record of what would later be called the Barrow degeneration. The Ministry of Silence, which had absorbed Dr. Barrow's private estate and research notes the year prior, did not permit publication of Vane's findings. Instead, they issued a circular to county physicians warning them against unauthorized speculation on hereditary malaise. Yet word traveled, as it always did, by letter, by rumor, by the mouths of those who had seen the afflicted and gone home whispering, I, the surviving line, after Dr. Barrow's disappearance in 1859. The family estate passed to his nephew, Jonathan Barrow, a man of somber bearing, who had once trained for the clergy, but left the seminary without explanation. He reopened the house that autumn, dismissing half the servants, and sealed 2 rooms with leaded boards. He told the neighbors it was for health reasons. Jonathan had inherited not only the house, but a large number of sealed boxes marked specimens. Fragile. Do not expose to light. He stored them in the attic and forbade entry. At night, the servants heard movement above, a dragging and a soft clicking sound, like a beetle inside a jar. Within months, Jonathan's demeanor began to alter. He ceased attending church. He was seen walking barefoot along the riverbank, muttering to himself. His hands trembled. His handwriting, once graceful, grew erratic and cramped. From his surviving correspondence with Dr. Vane, you must understand, Alaric, that my uncle's work was not heresy but preservation. He believed that memory itself could be bound in the blood. I have seen it. I have dreamt of things I could not have known, yet know them all the same. Tell me truly, is it madness to inherit another man's thoughts? Vane never replied. The letter was found among his effects after his death the following year, 2-1. The experiment reawakened. In late summer of 1860, the ministry reopened the Barrow laboratory under pretext of sanitation study. Its representatives, 5 men dressed in identical black coats, arrived with wagons and sealed the grounds for inspection. No one from the town was permitted entry for 3 days. When they departed, smoke rose from the back fields. The neighbors assumed the house was being cleansed of infection. But Jonathan Barrow was never seen again. A month later, Dr. Vane was summoned to the capital to deliver testimony on anomalous contagions. He never arrived. His empty carriage was found overturned on the road near Darien. The horses were alive, trembling and slick with sweat, but the doctor's seat was soaked in a thin layer of gray powder. The ministry filed no report. They simply struck his name from their register. A fragments from the Barrow Journal, recovered 1874, May 16. The children in town are pale. Some have the same mark behind the ear, a small white crescent, like the first sliver of the moon. They say it does not hurt. I remember Uncle pressing a cold coin there when I was young. Perhaps it left the shape behind. May 20. I dreamed again of the glass vessels. Inside them floated the shadows of faces. When I awoke, my hands smelled of ash and formaldehyde. May 27. The minister called. He asked if I had opened the eastern room. I told him yes, though it was a lie. He seemed pleased by that answer. He said the contents of the house belong not to the living but to the National Archive of Lineage. I did not ask what he meant. His eyes looked like mirrors. June 1. There is a pulse beneath the floorboards. It beats slower than the heart, but louder. Sometimes the sound stops, and the silence feels like suffocation. The journal ends abruptly after June 4. No body was ever recovered. IV. Report of Mr. Halden, undertaker, Hancock County, 1861. I was called to retrieve the remains of a woman said to be of the Barrow kin. The body was peculiar. Not stiff, not soft. The flesh had turned to something like wax. When we placed her in the coffin, her eyes opened, though she did not breathe. I closed them and nailed the lid fast. The next morning, the lid had split clean down the center as if from within. We buried her under stone, not soil. The silent years for the next decade. No one spoke of the Barrows. The ministry dissolved during the war, its archives absorbed by the state. But the infection, or inheritance, did not vanish. In 1872, a teacher at a rural school near the old estate recorded several children fainting during lessons. Their mouths bled faintly, leaving dark stains on their collars. The physician called it a hereditary disorder of the humors. By 1874, 12 of those children were dead. A local preacher, Reverend Cole, believed it was divine punishment for the blasphemy of the ancestors. He ordered the abandoned Barrow house burned. But the fire spread no farther than the threshold. The flames turned inward, consuming only the air, leaving the walls untouched. Witnesses described the smoke as colorless, tasting faintly of salt. A letter never sent, to the archivist, to undated, unsigned. You told me once that some families carry their sins as others carry their names. I understand now what you meant. The Barrows are ash from a fire that never truly went out. Their blood remembers heat, and when they die, the flame must go somewhere. It moves into paper, into air, into the veins of those who listen too closely. That is why the ministry never published their findings. Knowledge itself is the carrier. If you are reading this, stop. Burn these pages. Forget my name. Pulverid. Modern observation by the century's end. The Barrow lineage had thinned to 3 surviving members, each born with the telltale crescent behind the ear. One enlisted in the Spanish-American War and was buried overseas. Another entered the medical college in Augusta, but disappeared before completing his degree. The third, a woman named Clara, was admitted to the Savannah Hospital for melancholia of hereditary origin. In 1902, a nurse recorded that Clara refused to sleep indoors. She claimed that walls amplified the heart beneath the floor. On the night of her death, witnesses reported a faint tremor in the hospital's foundation, followed by a brief dimming of every lamp. When they examined her body, the crescent mark was gone. In its place was a thin streak of pale ash. The attending physician noted, no cause of death apparent. No decomposition observed after 3 days. The record ends there. All materials relating to the Barrow estate, including journals, autopsy reports, and the incomplete volumes of Dr. Barrow's research, are to be sealed indefinitely. Public release would endanger rational inquiry. The notion of hereditary memory, while intriguing, cannot be permitted further study. Henceforth, the Barrow case shall be referenced only by classification number 73, ash, All surviving descendants are to be monitored discreetly for signs of recurrence. The archivist who signed that order, Miss Eliza Harrow, vanished 2 months later. Her desk was found empty except for one sheet of paper. Upon it was written, in unfamiliar hand, "It does not end with blood." Extract from the private correspondence of Dr. Edwin L. Marrow, formerly of the Savannah School of Medicine, dated October 1862. "I have dissected hundreds of brains since my apprenticeship, yet none have looked back at me, until this month. A return to the house, the Barrow estate, now abandoned for 3 years, was requisitioned by the Army for field storage. Dr. Marrow, acting under the Office of Medical Inquiry, received orders to inventory biological materials of uncertain provenance. He found the main hall empty but for 6 wooden crates marked property of the Ministry, 73, ash. Rain crept through the cracked roof, forming little mirrors across the floorboards. The air smelled of metal and something faintly sweet. Ether or decay, he wrote in his field log that night. The specimens hum. Not audibly, but in the bones. When I stand near the boxes, my teeth ache as if remembering another mouth. He dismissed the sensation as fatigue. Still, he requested an assistant and additional candles. The reply came signed not by his superior, but by a man calling himself Archivist Gray, who advised, "Work only between dusk and dawn. Light confuses the material." 2. The glass hearts. The first crate contained 12 sealed jars. Each held a suspended organ, heart-shaped, though smaller than human, and each jar labeled with a date between 1834 and 1858. Within the fluid drifted a faint ash, forming patterns when disturbed. Marrow noted that, under lamplight, the sediment gathered toward him, as if sensing the warmth of his pulse. "These are not hearts," he wrote on the 3rd night. "They are vessels of recollection. I dream their contents before I open them." He began to record those dreams, a girl brushing soot from her sleeves, a child tracing circles in wet soil, a man whispering Latin as he buried glass in the orchard. The scenes were clear, vivid, and impossible for Marrow to have witnessed. When he compared his notes to surviving ministry files, he found the same images, sketched in the margins by an unknown clerk. The drawings were dated nearly 30 years earlier. 3. A visitation at midnight on the 5th night. Footsteps echoed overhead. The soldiers stationed outside swore they saw no intruder. Yet the next morning, Marrow found a page of handwriting on his desk, written in ink the color of dried blood. "Continue the work. The heart remembers when the mind decays." He placed the note inside his coat and sealed the laboratory. From that point onward, his journal became less clinical, more confessional. "I sense that I am repeating another man's task. Perhaps that is the nature of heredity, not merely flesh but intention. The hand performs what the blood recalls." UIV. Experiment 17 using a volunteer from the infirmary. A soldier dying of fever. Marrow attempted a transfusion with diluted solution from one of the jars. He recorded that the man ceased breathing for 47 seconds, then awoke reciting a childhood prayer in a language unknown to him. Afterward he spoke no more, though his eyes followed Marrow wherever he moved. 2 days later the patient died. His body left a faint gray residue on the linens. The report was never filed. Instead, Marrow wrote a private memorandum. "Memory can be carried in the smallest measure of blood. It adheres like soot to the soul." That night he burned the remaining samples of the solution, but the flames burned blue and produced no heat. V. Letters to Gray, November 2. "You were correct. Daylight scatters them. I have seen thoughts dissolve at sunrise like mist. If I sleep, I dream only of glass breaking. November 4. I fear contamination. My left eye reflects movement when none exists. When I close it, I see corridors lined with jars, each containing my own face at a different age. November 6. What did Barrow truly intend? Not immortality, I think, but distribution. A man divided among generations until no one part remembers itself." No further letters from the archivist survive. Marrow's final reply was returned unopened, marked addressee deceased. VI, autopsy report, undated, a fragment found in the archives decades later, unsigned but in Marrow's hand, specimen self. Procedure observation of post-mortem thought. Result. The subject continues to perceive for an indeterminate interval after death. Perception localized not in the brain but in particulate residue suspended within the blood. When exposed to air, the residue forms written characters on nearby surfaces, mirroring recent memory. On the page's reverse, faint words appeared, etched as if by smoke. We are not singular. OV. Aftermath. In 1863, soldiers retreating through Hancock County found the estate burnt to its foundations. Among the ashes lay a row of jars unbroken, their contents reduced to pale dust. A single medical ledger survived, though most pages had fused together. On the cover, scorched yet legible, were 3 words THENAMY off Mama Y. The ledger's final entry. It spreads through observation. Reading these notes completes the circuit. If you have reached this line, a measure of it is already in you. Devonry. Later accounts the legend persisted. In 1898, a physician lecturing at Emory University referenced a Marrow syndrome. Patients who recalled lives not their own, who blood fine gray powder when cut. His notes were confiscated by government agents. He died of stroke 3 days later. In 1921, a fire at the State Archive destroyed dozens of boxes labeled 73 ash. Witnesses claimed the smoke rose in shapes resembling faces, silent and translucent. X. Modern observation. Extract from a podcast transcript, 2023. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. Tonight we're discussing an 1860s medical case you've probably never heard of. The anatomy of memory. We found fragments of Dr. Marrow's journal online, scans from an old university archive. One of our researchers says the ink reacts under ultraviolet light, spelling new words each time it's read. Probably a trick of the scanner, right? Anyway, if you want the images, they're in the link below. L recording ends with 3 seconds of low static. When replayed at half speed, a faint whisper can be heard. Stop reading. Report filed 14th of May 1937 by Eleanor Vale, Junior Surveyor, Georgia Historical Preservation Office. Purpose: document remains of the Barrow Marrow Estate, Hancock County. No structure stands, yet the foundation persists. The cellar has sunk but not collapsed. I descended at noon, my watch stopped. Inside the ash-colored soil were flecks of glass, smooth on one side, pitted on the other, as though once molten and then cooled by breath. Vale's sketchbook records a spiral carved into the stone flooring, 3 feet across. At its center she noted a rusted iron hook and beneath it, embedded in clay, the outline of a small heart. She removed nothing. When she returned to camp that night, the spiral had reproduced in suit along the inside of her lantern glass. 2. Correspondence letter, 19th of May 1937, from E. Vale to Dr. Lucian Gray, Archivist, Ministry of Silency. Sir, I regret disturbing your retirement, yet the markings here align precisely with sketches attributed to Dr. Marrow. The air beneath the ruin carries a taste of copper. When I hold my breath I hear movement, like ink drawn through water. Were there ever reports of auditory residue from the ash series? My men refused to camp within a mile of the place. Gray's reply arrived weeks later, typed and unsigned. Observation sustains it. Do not map the site. Burn the sketches. Here. The reversal. Vale ignored the warning. She ordered a photographic survey at night, claiming the daylight exposures failed. The negatives, when developed, revealed human silhouettes positioned about the spiral. 13 of them, none matching anyone present. In every frame, Vale herself appeared twice, once standing, once kneeling. The technicians refused further work. 2 resigned. Vale's diary for 2 June reads, "The spiral is not carved but remembered by the stone. When I pour water over it, the pattern glows briefly as if recalling the Chesil." By midsummer she had begun sleeping in the ruin, convinced that the earth spoke when unobserved. IV. Transcript recovered wire recording, 1938, a portion of Vale's voice, recovered from an office dictaphone in Savannah, day 41. The cellar breathes. Not metaphorically, truly expands and contracts. Each inhalation releases a fine gray dust that clings to the tongue. Tastes of lightning. I have concluded that the estate was never destroyed, merely folded, like a muscle drawn inward. The walls remember their dimensions. Perhaps, given sufficient witness, they will unfold again. The recording ends with the sound of stone shifting, and a single exhalation not belonging to her. The return autumn 1939. Locals reported a phantom manor, visible at twilight. Windows lit though no structure stood. Children who approached claimed to see rooms made of smoke. An old preacher identified the place by its shape. Barrow Hall. On the 21st of October, a thunderstorm passed through the county. Witnesses saw lightning strike the foundation. For 7 seconds, an entire house appeared, walls, chimneys, and figures moving within, then vanished. Next morning the soil around the site steamed, leaving circular burns that matched the spiral from Vale's sketches. Eleanor Vale was never found. Her tent remained. Inside lay her camera and one undeveloped roll of film. When processed, the film showed the empty cellar, but in the final frame, a door stood open in midair, light spilling from within. The interim file declassified memorandum, Ministry of Silence, 1940, subject reconstitution event, Hancock County, recommendation quarantine perimeter mile radius, deploy observers only under overcast conditions, under no circumstance allow reflective instruments on site. The image repeats itself. The handwritten beneath, the house wants witnesses. Of the archive incident by 1954, surviving ministry staff were absorbed into federal departments. During transfer of their records to Washington, 5 crates labeled 73, ash ruptured. One archivist described a wind of paper that carried fragments across the room. When gathered, each page had altered slightly, sentences rearranged to form the same phrase again and again. Wear Taichi Raoom. Those crates were sealed in lead and placed in cold storage 13, Fort McPherson. 3 months later a fire consumed the entire sub-basement, leaving only black glass fused to the floor. Field Note 1967. Dr. Peter Sloan, historian, visited the ruin on the war's centennial. He recorded a single observation in his pocket journal. At dusk I saw a window suspended in air. Through it, a room furnished in 19th century style. Chairs, a pianoforte, a figure turning pages of a ledger. When I stepped closer, the window moved back, keeping distance like a mirage. I realized the figure was using my hand to write. He never returned to teaching. His students reported that, in lectures, he would sometimes pause mid-sentence and whisper, "I remember another ceiling, IX." The Present Podcast Transcript 2024. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. We've got a strange listener submission tonight. A guy named Ben Sloan sent scans of his grandfather's notes about something called the House That Remembers. He says the family still owns a plot in Georgia where, on humid nights, they hear knocking beneath the ground. The photos he sent are wild. One looks like a doorway made of smoke. We'll post them on our socials after the break. A static. Then, faintly, don't post them. 2 days after the episode aired, the file vanished from every platform. The hosts reported corrupted drives, each reformatted into a single folder, named "Da Room," containing 13 identical audio clips, a door creaking open. Ex-epilogue curator's note 2025. While preparing a digital exhibit on 19th century Southern architecture, a curator in Atlanta located a photograph previously misfiled under agricultural structures. The print shows a house of brick and timber half transparent against a cloudy sky. Beneath it, faint but readable, an inscription in faded ink. Memory built this. Within 48 hours the museum's internal servers began generating duplicate copies of the image, each slightly sharper than the last. When the curator attempted deletion, the system displayed a single prompt. Continue restoration. The official record ends there. Yet locals still speak of light pooling over the old foundations whenever a camera flash goes off nearby. As if the soil is trying to remember what stood there, and sometimes, in the static between broadcasts, a voice, calm, archival, certain, repeats a single line, "We are still inside," extracts from the surviving journals of Dr. Nathaniel Harlow, physician of the Colonial Institute for Mind and Memory, Boston 1902-1905, with marginalia added by later archivists, date uncertain. The manuscript begins abruptly, in a hand that trembles yet never loses its elegance. March 4, 1902. The arrival of the Clearwater specimens has unsettled the entire department. The crates bear no insignia, except an obsolete Georgia seal, and the smell of mildew and iron escapes even through the waxed wrapping. Inside, beneath layers of decayed cotton, are 12 notebooks, 3 anatomical sketches, and a small mirrored panel sealed in pitch. The letter of conveyance merely states, "Property recovered from the estate of the late Judge Horace Keaton, formerly of Hancock County, 1852. Dr. Harlow notes that the mirror, roughly the size of a man's palm, reflects with an uncanny crispness, as though the silvering remembers more than light. He was warned not to touch it. He did, of course. Within weeks, the Institute's night staff began to report disturbances, whispers inside the specimen cabinets, a heartbeat that seemed to echo through the marble corridor, the odor of old rain and lamp oil wherever Harlow had been working. His assistants swore the reflections within the glass shifted fractionally, showing not the laboratory but something else. Brickwork blackened by soot, a field of rusted iron crosses, the suggestion of bodies half submerged. Harlow's next entry is more clinical, less poetic, yet somehow more dreadful for its restraint. April 12. The mirror displays after images inconsistent with direct observation. When examined under gaslight, faint outlines appear, faces perhaps, though decomposed by motion blur. A single word seems to rise and fade at intervals. Hair. Hair to what? The doctor does not yet say. By late spring, one of his students, an earnest young woman named Eliza Trent, recorded her own experience with the artifact. Her statement was found much later in a sealed envelope. "It is not merely reflection," she wrote. "It is memory, suspended in a mineral state. When the doctor sleeps at his desk, I see his dreams moving behind the glass as fog. It breathes when no one is near. I think it is feeding on recollection itself, growing fat on everything we try to document." Eliza disappeared soon after, leaving only her ink-stained apron and a single line scratched into the wooden bench. The past is carnivorous. The following summer, Harlow was found in his study, the notebooks scattered like leaves. Witnesses said he had taken to speaking with the glass as though with a confidant. His final dated entry reads, August 19, 1903. It resists enclosure. The experiment is no longer scientific but penitential. I have begun to dream of a house whose rooms reconfigure themselves when unobserved. There are footsteps in its corridors and 3 voices reciting numbers. The sum, I think, is birth. After that, only fragments remain, half-finished equations, inkblots, a phrase repeated dozens of times, inheritance without consent, a marginal notes archivist, c.972 and specimens destroyed in 1905 fire, mirror never recovered, possible link to South Carolina archive breach 1964, review with caution, records exhibit cognitive interference, see attached transcript of 1967 broadcast, an audio transcript public radio liturgy of fear, recorded 1967 USAVO. Tonight's episode concerns a physician who may have unlocked the physical residue of sin. The Institute for Mind and Memory was closed after the 1905 fire, but local rumor insists that a single mirror fragment survived, passed through private hands until appearing in Boston again in 1938. Scholars describe it as a psychotropic relic, capable of retaining the emotional imprint of its owners. Those who studied it suffered identical dreams, fields of stagnant water, a burning house, and the voice of a man repeating, hair, hair, hair. When the recording stops, listen carefully. Sometimes the tape does not end cleanly. A hiss of static follows. Then faintly, just beneath the frequency threshold, a man's breath and the low sound of water. A century later, modern restoration laboratories digitized that same tape. What they found embedded in the waveform has never been publicly released. But the technician's private notes, declassified in 2011, state, within the background noise are coherent syllables, archaic Georgian dialect, mid-19th century. A name repeats 4 times, each slower than the last. When reversed, it forms a perfect palindrome. I played it once through studio monitors. For 2 days afterward, all reflective surfaces in my flat showed an extra figure standing behind me. The eyes were my own. And so, the legend of Clearwater reasserted itself. Through science, through sound, through the data we mistake for truth. What began as a Plantation's secret experiment in lineage had transmuted into something metaphysical, a contagion of observation, a heredity of memory itself. The descendants of those who once lived upon that soil found themselves drawn, generation by generation, into its echo. Not through blood now, but through attention. The mirror had become a medium not of reflection but of transmission. Document 9C, recovered from digital drive seized in 2014. Anonymous author. When I play the 1967 recording backward, there is a structure not random at all. Each repetition of the word air corresponds to a date: 1834, 1852, 1903, 1967, 2014. I think they are not years but coordinates of recurrence. The mirror doesn't show faces, it shows thresholds. I have tried to destroy the file 3 times. Each time it reappears in a different folder, titled Inheritance. Doc. It is always last opened at the exact moment I wake from dreaming of water. The narrative, which began in a world of law, blood and soil, now persisted as information, clean, digitized, inescapable. One could trace its path through court ledgers, medical notes, radio hiss, and binary code, and still never find its heart, because the heart of it had ceased to be a story. It had become a structure, an architecture of repetition. That, perhaps, was the true legacy of Edmund Keaton and his generation, not the physical crimes, but the idea that knowledge itself could reproduce unchecked, devouring everything it tried to illuminate. Final entry, Harlow's recovered page, found in the binding of a later book. To observe is to become kin. To remember is to continue the bloodline. We do not inherit flesh, we inherit perception. The mirror is merely the instrument. Below the writing is a dark smear, possibly ink, possibly something else, and the faint reflection of whoever reads it next. Narrator present day, and so it passes from hand to hand, archive to archive, each retelling polishing the surface a little cleaner until, one evening, the listener finally sees their own outline ripple inside the glass. If you've listened this far, if you've followed the line through every century, then you too are already part of the experiment. It no longer matters what name it began under. The observation completes the sequence. Do not look into mirrors tonight. Compiled from the surviving correspondence of Dr. Nathaniel Harlow, 1905, a partial field report from the Georgia Historical Commission, 1937, and a transcript of the final Liturgy of Fear broadcast, 2023. All materials declassified and combined here for continuity of study. The handwriting on Harlow's last surviving letter is almost illegible, nervous, hasty, yet unmistakably his. March 8, 1905. The fire has not abated. It moves with intention, leaping corridors that have no draft, crossing concrete floors where nothing flammable should exist. I cannot tell whether it burns outward or inward. All records of the Keaton specimens are lost. Only the mirror remains intact, though I buried it in salt and sand within the Institute courtyard. Should it be found, destroy it without hesitation. Memory is a contagion. Reflection is its vector. The next day the Institute collapsed. All 21 staff perished. Only the courtyard remained, strangely unscathed. And though the fire was officially deemed electrical, the surviving telegram from Boston Fire Brigade states, bluntly, origin indeterminate. Flames appeared to radiate from beneath the earth, not above it. No mirror was ever catalogued among the ruins. 1937, Field, Reporgiva Historia MES, Eon. Investigator Samuel A. Winslow, Ph.D. Anthropology. Location former Clearwater Plantation, Hancock County. The site bears no resemblance to its 1850s description. Only a field of scorched pines and the outline of a foundation remain. Local residents refuse to approach after sundown. One child reports hearing glass breathing under the soil. The smell of lamp oil lingers after rain. Recovered from the ash was a metallic object roughly 6 inches square, fused with stone. Preliminary assessment suggests it is a mirror plate subjected to extreme heat, yet one corner remains reflective. When photographed, the image shows an additional figure not present in the scene. The plate was sealed and sent to Atlanta for further study. The crate arrived in Atlanta but was found empty. The courier could not recall loading it. ARC Chivell notes 1959. No further evidence of the Keaton mirror exists within state records. The Clearwater Foundation was later submerged when the river was diverted in 1961. Fishermen occasionally report catching fragments of old glass in their nets. Transcripts 2023 OSTs RWO. Tonight's broadcast closes our investigation into the Clearwater inheritance. You've heard the trial transcripts, the physician's letters, the radio accounts. Now, for the first time, you'll hear the sound recovered from the 1967 reel. The one technicians believed contaminated by reverse speech. We've restored it to clarity. Listen carefully. Audio crackle, a low rhythmic thump like a pulse, then a man's whisper faint but articulate. Oh Aisha, to know is to continue. Silence. A second voice, the host's uncertain now. Kahai Oest. It said something new. That line wasn't on the tape before. Wait. Did someone? A feedback shriek. Recording cuts abruptly. The station never aired another episode. Its archives were later purchased by an educational consortium in Maine, who, perhaps unwisely, digitized every file. Within days, their internal servers began duplicating audio fragments on their own. Each file bore the same creation timestamp 03:08 AM, the hour Harlow's last entry was written. Perivide MLEXNG Rideza 2024 Dr. Lee Gant, Digital Preservation Lead, Toy Internal IT Subject Mirror Error Logs. We have recurring reflections within file thumbnails. Literally. The image viewer shows my office behind me, though the camera was off. The IT intern says it's an AI glitch. He's wrong. I recognize the hallway wallpaper. It's from the Georgia Courthouse, 1853. Delete these backups immediately. 3 weeks later, Dr. Gant disappeared. Her office monitor remained powered on, displaying a paused video frame of her chair. Empty, but in the reflection of the darkened screen, her outline still visible. HYPE's SS is compiled by anonymous researcher 2025. The Clearwater event does not end with lineage or geography. It persists as patent, a self-replicating archive encoded in every act of observation. When data is copied, when text is read aloud, when attention forms a circuit, the phenomenon reawakens. The Keaton mirror was never an object. It was a design for permanence, inheritance without consent. We are all, now, custodians of that design, and that brings us here. To you, the reader, the listener, the final participant in a century-long experiment of remembrance. Every repetition, every retelling, is a continuation. Every reflection opens the circuit a little wider. If you've read this far, you've already taken your place in the lineage. The house that remembered has learned your name. Listen. That faint hum behind the words. That isn't static. It's breath. Do not attempt to verify any of these archives after midnight. Do not play back the recording. Do not check the mirror. Because the experiment doesn't want your belief. It only wants your attention. And now it has it.